Today I will try to explain the laws of supply and demand as best as I can. Supply and demand is perhaps one of the most fundamental concepts of economics. It is also the backbone of a market economy. Whether you are a farmer, a pharmaceutical manufacturer, or simply a consumer, the basics of supply and demand equilibrium are mixed into daily actions of our society. At its core, supply and demand reveal the relationship prices and quantities of goods. The relationships between supply and demand underlie the forces behind the allocations of resources. In market economy theories, supply and demand theory will allocate resources in the most efficient way possible. Now, I will begin by explaining the law of demand first. Hopefully, by understanding the law of demand better, learning the law of supply later will be even easier to understand. The law of demand states that if all other factors remain equal, the higher the price of a good, the less people will demand that good. In other words, the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. The amount of a good that buyers purchase at a higher price is less because as the price of a good goes up, so does the opportunity cost of buying that good. This figure depicts the most basic relationship between the price of a good and its demand from the standpoint of the customer. This is actually one of the most important differences between the supply curve and the demand curve. Whereas the supply curve graphs are drawn from the perspective of the producer, demand is portrayed from the perspective of the consumer. Here's another, more complex graph that may help you understand the demand curve even better. A, B, and C are points on the demand curve. Each point on the curve reflects a direct correlation between quantity demanded, which is Q, and the price, which is P. So, at point A, the quantity demanded will be Q1, and the price will be P1, and then so on. The demand relationship curve illustrates the negative relationships between price and quantity demanded. The higher the price of a good, the lower the quantity demanded is A, and the lower the price, the more the good will be in demand, which is C. Now, after going over a couple graphs and getting to know the definition of the law of demand, I will now go over the law of supply. Now that you know how the law of demand works, hopefully understanding the law of supply will be even easier for you. Like the law of demand, the law of supply demonstrates the quantities that will be sold at a certain price. But unlike the law of demand, the supply relationship shows an upward slope. This means that the higher the price, the higher quantity supplied. Producers supply more at a higher price because selling a higher quantity at a higher price increases revenue. The supply curve functions in a similar fashion, but it considers the relationship between the price and available supply of an item from the perspective of the producer rather than the consumer. Once again, here's another more complex graph that shows information in more detail about the supply curve. A, B, and C are points on the supply curve. Each point on the curve reflects a direct correlation between quantity supplied, which is Q, and price, which is P. At point B, the quantity supplied will be Q2 and the price will be P2, and then so on. Unlike the demand relationship, however, the supply relationship is a factor of time. Time is more important to supply because suppliers must but cannot always react quickly to a change in demand or price. So it is important to try and determine whether a price change that is caused by demand will be temporary or permanent. For example, Let's say that there is a sudden increase in demand and price for umbrellas in an unexpected rainy season. Suppliers may simply accommodate demand by using the umbrellas more intensively. The last thing that I will talk about and explain is when the supply and the demand are equal. When this occurs, the supply function and the demand function cross, creating the equilibrium. At this point, the allocation of goods is at its most efficient because the amount of goods being supplied is exactly the same as the amount of goods being demanded. As you can see on the chart, equilibrium occurs at the intersection of the demand and supply curve, which indicates no allocative inefficiency. At this point, the price of the goods will be P and the quantity will be Q. These figures are referred to as equilibrium price and quantity. In the real marketplace, equilibrium can only ever be reached in theory, so the prices of goods and services are constantly changing in relation to fluctuations in demand and supply. There are many more characteristics and features of supply and demand than discussed. The distinctions of the supply-demand relationship involves excess supply, excess demand, shifts and movements along both supply and demand curves, as well as disequilibrium. All of these features are very important to the laws of supply and demand. Knowing how given situational characteristics and features work will help you better understand how our market economy functions. Hopefully, by knowing more about the details of economic relationships concerning the laws of supply and demand, you will be able to apply new knowledge in order to apply the theory to given situations.